They laughed at her, until the black viper mark made a SEAL colonel freeze the drill. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as Sarah Chen adjusted her combat boots one final time. She could feel dozens of eyes watching her every move, some curious, others openly skeptical. At 24, she was the youngest recruit in the elite tactical training program, and certainly the only woman who had made it this far. "Look at her," whispered Private Johnson to his buddy Martinez. "She thinks she can handle what's coming. This ain't summer camp, princess." Sarah heard the comment but kept her expression neutral. She had learned long ago that reacting to such remarks only gave them more power. Instead, she focused on checking her gear methodically. Her tactical vest was properly adjusted, her weapon was clean and ready, and her mind was sharp. She had trained for this moment for 3 years. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy. 53 military personnel from various branches had gathered for the most grueling assessment program the military had to offer. Only 12 would make it through to the Special Operations pipeline. The rest would return to their regular units, some with bruised egos, and others with newfound respect for what elite soldiers endured. Sergeant Major Williams, a mountain of a man with scars that told stories of battles fought in distant lands, stepped onto the platform overlooking the assembled recruits. His voice boomed across the training ground without need for amplification. "Listen up, soldiers. You think you're tough. You think you've seen hard training.
You think you know what sacrifice means?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "You're wrong."
What you're about to experience will break most of you. Some of you will quit before lunch. Others will make it a day, maybe 2. The lucky few who survive will earn something that can't be bought, stolen, or faked. Sarah noticed how some recruits shifted uncomfortably. She remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. Years of meditation and mental conditioning had taught her to find calm in the storm. The program you're entering has been refined through decades of trial and error. Every exercise has been designed to push you beyond what you think is possible. Physical strength will only take you so far. Mental toughness will carry you further. But what separates the elite from everyone else is something deeper. Williams began walking along the line of recruits, making eye contact with each person. When he reached Sarah, he stopped for a moment longer than with the others. She met his gaze without flinching. "Some of you are wondering why you're here. Others are questioning whether you belong. That doubt will eat you alive if you let it. The only opinion that matters is the one you prove with your actions." His eyes remained fixed on Sarah as he spoke. "Excellence doesn't care about your background, your gender, or what others think of you. It only cares about results." The first challenge came within an hour. A 12-mile march carrying full gear across terrain that seemed designed by someone who hated human knees. The pace was brutal from the start, with instructors constantly pushing for speed while maintaining formation. Sarah found herself naturally falling into step with a rhythm that felt sustainable. She had learned this technique from her father, a former Marine who had taught her that endurance was as much about mental discipline as physical conditioning. Around her, she could hear heavy breathing and occasional complaints. "This is insane," panted Rodriguez, a stocky soldier who had been bragging about his marathon times earlier. "Nobody can maintain this pace for 12 miles. "The instructors seem to be doing fine," Sarah replied quietly, nodding toward the cadre members who were moving alongside the group with apparent ease. She had noticed that they weren't even breathing hard, which meant this pace was considered moderate by their standards. By mile 6, the first casualties began to drop out. Blisters, cramps, and exhaustion claimed 5 recruits who simply couldn't continue. The instructors showed no sympathy, quickly arranging for medical evaluation and transportation back to the main base. Sarah felt her own muscles beginning to protest, but she had expected this. Pain was just information. Her father had taught her. It told you what was happening in your body, but it didn't have to control your decisions. She adjusted her breathing pattern and focused on the steady rhythm of her steps. The real test came at mile 9, when Sergeant Carter, one of the assistant instructors, decided to add some psychological pressure. "Chen!" he barked, jogging up beside her. "You're struggling back there. Maybe you should consider dropping out before you embarrass yourself further." Sarah glanced at him briefly, then returned her attention to the path ahead. "I'm maintaining pace, Sergeant. Barely. Look around you. See how the real soldiers are handling this?" She did look around. 3 more recruits had fallen behind and were clearly in distress. Several others were showing obvious signs of fatigue. Carter was trying to get into her head, a common tactic she had read about in military psychology texts. "I see soldiers being pushed to their limits, Sergeant. Same as me." Carter increased his pace to match a group of male recruits who were pulling slightly ahead. "See those guys? They're not even breathing hard. That's what natural ability looks like." Sarah smiled slightly, which seemed to irritate him. "Respectfully, Sergeant, natural ability is what you're born with. What matters is what you build on top of it." The comment earned her a sharp look, but Carter moved on to harass other recruits. Sarah used a brief respite to assess her own condition. Her legs were holding up well. Her breathing was controlled, and her mental state remained focused. She was actually in better shape than she had expected to be at this point. The finish line appeared suddenly as they crested a hill. A cluster of military vehicles waited in a small clearing, along with medical personnel and what appeared to be evaluation officers. Sarah could see a large digital timer displaying their elapsed time, 4 hours and 17 minutes. As recruits began stumbling across the finish line, Sarah maintained her steady pace until the very end. She crossed with the main group, not first, but certainly not last. More importantly, she didn't collapse or require medical attention like several others did. "Not bad, Chen," said Private Martinez, who had made it through but looked like he might throw up. "I didn't think you'd finish." "Thanks," she replied, already beginning her cool-down routine. She had learned the importance of proper recovery techniques, and she wasn't about to cramp up now after completing the march successfully. Williams appeared beside the group with a clipboard. 37 of you finished the march within the time standard. Congratulations. You've earned the right to continue to the next phase." Sarah felt a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had cleared the first hurdle, but she knew it was just the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead. That evening, the remaining recruits gathered in a temporary mess hall for dinner and briefings about the next day's activities. The conversation was subdued, with most people too tired or focused to engage in much social interaction. Sarah found herself sitting with a mixed group of soldiers from different branches. There was Thompson from the Air Force, a quiet communications specialist who had surprised everyone by finishing the march near the front of the pack. Rodriguez from earlier had made it through but looked haggard. Jackson, a Navy petty officer, was methodically stretching while he ate. "So what's your story, Chen?" asked Thompson. "You're not what most people expect to see in a program like this." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "Come on, you know what I mean. This place is usually all guys all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with women in the military, but special operations has always been a boys' club," finished Rodriguez. "That's what you're trying to say without saying it." Sarah considered her response carefully. She could get defensive, which would probably make things worse. She could minimize her presence, which went against everything she believed. Or she could be direct and honest. "I'm here for the same reason you are," she said finally. "I want to serve at the highest level possible. I want to be part of something that matters. And I think I have what it takes to succeed." Jackson nodded approvingly. "That's a solid answer. I respect that. But do you really think you can handle what's coming?" Rodriguez pressed. "I mean, no disrespect, but this program is designed to break people. It's going to get physical in ways that might not play to your strengths." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "I guess we'll find out together." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Sarah could sense she was still being evaluated by her peers. Every comment she made, every action she took, was being weighed and measured against their expectations. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical training. Later that night, as she lay in her narrow bunk, Sarah reflected on the day. She had passed the first test, but she could already see the pattern that would likely continue throughout the program. Every achievement would be scrutinized more closely than those of her male counterparts. Every mistake would be magnified. Every moment of weakness would be used as evidence that she didn't belong. But she also remembered her father's words from years ago. "The only way to change people's minds is to show them something they've never seen before. You can't argue your way to respect. You have to earn it, one day at a time." Sarah closed her eyes and began her mental preparation routine for the next day. She visualized herself succeeding at whatever challenges awaited. She reminded herself of all the training that had brought her to this point, and she reinforced her commitment to proving that excellence had nothing to do with gender. Outside, she could hear the sound of night training exercises in the distance. Other groups were going through their own trials, pushing their own limits. The military never slept, never stopped demanding the best from those who chose to serve. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new opportunities to prove herself, and undoubtedly new skeptics who would need to be won over. But tonight, Sarah Chen was exactly where she wanted to be, doing exactly what she had trained for, with a clear sense of purpose that no amount of doubt or criticism could shake. The first day was over. 36 more to go. Week 2 brought a different kind of challenge altogether. The physical tests had been grueling, but at least they were straightforward. Run faster, climb higher, carry more weight. The new phase introduced psychological warfare, tactical problem solving, and leadership scenarios that would separate those who could think under pressure from those who simply followed orders. Sarah stood in the pre-dawn darkness with 19 other survivors. The program had already claimed 18 recruits, some through injury, others through voluntary withdrawal, and a few through simple failure to meet standards. Each departure had been met with the same emotionless efficiency from the instructors. No speeches, no encouragement to try again next time, just a handshake and transportation back to regular duty. Today we begin the meat of this program, announced Captain Morrison, the senior instructor who had taken over from Williams for this phase. Morrison was different from Williams. Where Williams was loud and imposing, Morrison spoke quietly and seemed to see everything. His reputation preceded him. A former Delta Force operator with more commendations than anyone could count, and a teaching style that was legendary for its effectiveness. You've proven you can suffer. Congratulations! A lot of people can suffer. What we need to determine now is whether you can think while you suffer, lead while you're afraid, and make good decisions when everything is falling apart around you. The first scenario seemed simple enough. Small teams of 4 would be given a tactical problem to solve with limited resources and a strict time deadline. Sarah found herself grouped with Thompson, Rodriguez, and a newcomer she hadn't worked with before, Corporal Davis, a Marine who had been quietly impressive throughout the physical challenges. All right, team leaders, Morrison continued. You have 30 seconds to designate someone to run your group. Choose poorly and you'll all fail together. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the 4 of them looked at each other. Sarah could see Rodriguez wanted to volunteer, but he was glancing between her and Davis, clearly uncertain. Davis seemed content to let someone else take charge. Thompson was studying the tactical brief they had been handed. I'll do it, Sarah said simply. Rodriguez looked relieved. Sounds good to me, Davis nodded. What's the plan, boss? Sarah quickly scanned the scenario description. Their mission was to extract a high-value target from a hostile environment using limited ammunition, no vehicle support, and a 4-hour window before enemy reinforcements arrived. The twist was that one team member would be wounded after the first hour and would need to be carried. Thompson, you're our communications specialist. You'll coordinate with extraction while the rest of us set up the approach. Rodriguez, you and Davis will establish a perimeter. I'll handle the actual extraction. She looked up at her team. Questions? What about when one of us gets wounded? Asked Davis. We'll adapt based on who it is and what the tactical situation looks like at that point. No point in over-planning something we can't predict. Morrison appeared beside their group. Chen, you're confident in your plan? I'm confident we can execute it, sir. Even if things don't go according to script, especially then. Morrison smiled slightly and moved on. Sarah noticed that he had spent less time questioning the other team leaders, but she couldn't tell if that was good or bad. The exercise began with a helicopter insertion into rough terrain. Sarah's team moved quickly toward their objective, a small building complex where their target waited. The scenario was played out with impressive realism, complete with blank ammunition, smoke effects, and role players acting as hostile forces. Everything went smoothly for the first 45 minutes. They had established good communications, scouted their target area, and were preparing for the extraction when the first complication arose. Chen, Rodriguez just got hit, called Davis over the radio. He's down and can't move. Sarah felt her heart rate spike, but her training kicked in immediately. She had drilled scenarios like this dozens of times in her previous units. Thompson, call for immediate extraction to Rodriguez's position. Davis, can you carry him? Negative. Enemy fire is too heavy. We need to neutralize the threat first. This was the moment that would define her leadership. She could play it safe and call for backup, which might get them all killed in a real situation. Or she could take calculated risks to complete the mission. Davis, give me 30 seconds of suppressing fire, then move to Rodriguez. Thompson, guide me to the enemy position. Sarah moved quickly through the terrain, using every piece of cover available. She could hear the simulated gunfire behind her and knew her team was counting on her to eliminate the threat. When she finally spotted the enemy position, She realized why Davis had been pinned down. The role players had established themselves in a perfect defensive position that would be almost impossible to assault directly. Instead of attacking head-on, Sarah circled around to find a flanking position. It took precious time, but it allowed her to approach from an unexpected angle. When she finally engaged the enemy role players, the exercise concluded quickly in their favor. "Nice work, Chen," said the exercise controller. "Most teams try to assault that position directly. You showed good tactical thinking under pressure, but the real test came during the debrief session." Morrison gathered all the teams together to discuss what had happened and what lessons could be learned. "Team 3, tell us about your leadership decision-making process," he said, looking directly at Sarah. Sarah stood up, knowing that everyone was watching her. "When Rodriguez went down, I had to balance mission completion against team safety. A direct assault would have been faster, but likely would have resulted in more casualties. The flanking maneuver took longer but minimized risk while still accomplishing the objective." "And you made that decision how quickly?" "About 5 seconds, sir." Morrison nodded. "Team leaders, take note. Chen didn't have time to poll her team or second-guess herself. She assessed the situation, made a decision based on available information, and executed it. That's what we need in the field." Sarah sat down, aware that several of her peers were looking at her differently than they had before. She had proven something important, not just to the instructors, but to herself. The weeks that followed brought increasingly complex challenges. There were survival exercises where teams had to find food and water while evading capture. There were urban warfare simulations that tested their ability to operate in civilian environments. There were long-range reconnaissance missions that required incredible attention to detail and patience. Through it all, Sarah found herself being selected as team leader more often than the statistical average would suggest. At first, she wondered if the instructors were setting her up to fail by giving her additional responsibilities. But as the exercises progressed, she realized it was the opposite. Her peers had begun requesting her as their leader. "You don't panic," Thompson explained one evening as they cleaned their weapons after a particularly challenging day. "When things get crazy, you get calmer." "That's not normal." "Plus, you actually listen to what people say," added Davis. "Half these guys just want to show off how tough they are. You care about getting the mission done right." The validation felt good, but Sarah knew she couldn't let it go to her head. There were still instructors who seemed skeptical of her capabilities, and she could sense that bigger challenges were coming. The first hint of what lay ahead came during a briefing from Captain Morrison in Week 4. The group had shrunk to just 12 recruits, and the atmosphere had become more serious as the program entered its final phase. "You've all proven you can handle the basics," Morrison said. "Physical conditioning, tactical thinking, leadership under stress. Now we test whether you can handle the psychological pressure that comes with real special operations work." He gestured to a new instructor who had joined the program, a Navy SEAL commander whose presence immediately commanded attention. Colonel Marcus Webb had the kind of reputation that preceded him by miles. 2 decades of special operations experience, including classified missions that would never be discussed publicly. "Colonel Webb will be overseeing the final evaluation exercises," Morrison continued. "These scenarios will test everything you've learned and several things you haven't. The standards are absolute. There are no second chances and no participation trophies." Webb stepped forward, and Sarah immediately noticed something that made her blood run cold. On his left forearm, barely visible beneath his rolled sleeves, was a distinctive tattoo. It was small and simple, just a black viper coiled in a perfect circle. She had seen that mark only once before, in a classified briefing about enemy combatants in Southeast Asia. Her father had told her stories about soldiers who carried that mark. It identified members of an elite unit that operated in the grey areas between official military action and plausible deniability. They were the ones who handled missions that couldn't be acknowledged, in places that didn't officially exist, against enemies who would never be named in reports. Sarah forced herself to maintain her composure, but her mind was racing. Why was someone with that background here? What kind of evaluation required that level of experience to oversee? "Your final exercise begins tomorrow," Webb said in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of countless difficult decisions. "You'll be working individually, not in teams. The scenario will test every skill you've developed and several you haven't thought about yet." He looked directly at Sarah for just a moment, and she felt as though he could see right through her. "Some of you will discover that you're capable of more than you ever imagined. Others will learn that there are lines you're not prepared to cross. Both outcomes are valuable, but only one will earn you a place in this community. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about what lay ahead. The program had pushed her harder than she had ever been pushed before, but she had met every challenge. She had earned the respect of her peers and most of the instructors. She was exactly where she wanted to be. But something about Colonel Webb's presence suggested that everything up to this point had been preparation for something much more serious. The black viper mark meant he had operated in environments where the normal rules didn't apply, where decisions had to be made with incomplete information and permanent consequences. Tomorrow would reveal whether she was truly ready for that level of responsibility, or whether she had been preparing for something beyond her capabilities. Either way, she was committed to finding out. She had come too far to back down now, regardless of what shadows might be lurking in the final challenge ahead. The final exercise began before dawn, with Sarah and the 11 remaining recruits standing in a stark briefing room they hadn't seen before. The walls were bare except for a single American flag and a digital screen that currently showed nothing but a military seal. Colonel Webb stood at attention in front of them, his presence somehow more intimidating in the confined space. "What you're about to experience is not a game," Webb began, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there during previous briefings. "This is a simulation of a real-world scenario that special operations personnel face regularly. The decisions you make will have consequences. The stress you feel will be genuine. The evaluation will be absolute." He pressed a button on a remote control, and the screen behind him came to life, showing a detailed map of an urban environment. Buildings, streets, and tactical positions were marked with military precision. The scenario is simple in concept, complex in execution. A high-value asset has been compromised in a hostile environment. Standard extraction protocols have failed. You are the last option for bringing this person home safely. Sarah studied the map carefully, noting escape routes, potential ambush points, and civilian populations that would complicate any military action. This wasn't a training exercise in some remote facility. The map showed a real city, with real people who would be affected by whatever actions were taken. The complication, Webb continued, is that the asset is being held in a location that will require significant collateral damage to breach. Civilian casualties are not just possible, they're probable. Your mission is to extract the asset while minimizing but not eliminating collateral damage. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't about physical endurance or tactical skills anymore. This was about moral decision-making under impossible circumstances. Each of you will execute this mission individually, in a full immersion simulation environment. Your actions will be recorded and evaluated not just for tactical effectiveness, but for adherence to rules of engagement, consideration of civilian safety, and overall judgment under extreme stress. Webb's eyes moved across each recruit as he spoke. When his gaze reached Sarah, she felt that same unsettling sense that he was seeing something others missed. Questions. Thompson raised his hand tentatively. "Sir, what's the acceptable level of collateral damage for this mission?" "That's for you to determine based on the value of the asset and the tactical situation you encounter. There are no predetermined answers. There's only your judgment and the consequences that follow from it." The first recruit called for the simulation was Davis. He disappeared into an adjacent room with 2 technicians, and the rest waited in increasingly tense silence. Through the thin walls, they could hear muffled voices and what sounded like explosions or gunfire from whatever technology was being used to create the simulation. When Davis emerged 45 minutes later, his face was pale and he was sweating despite the cool temperature of the building. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he was led away for what Webb called individual debrief and evaluation. One by one, the recruits disappeared into the simulation room. Some came out looking confident, others appeared shaken. None of them were allowed to discuss what they had experienced, which only added to the psychological pressure building in the waiting room. Sarah was called 6th, which meant she had been sitting with her own thoughts and growing anxiety for nearly 4 hours. She had tried to prepare mentally for whatever she might face, but without knowing the specific parameters of the simulation, all she could do was remind herself of her training and her values. The simulation room was unlike anything she had expected. It wasn't a computer setup or a virtual reality environment. Instead, it appeared to be a fully constructed mock-up of an urban environment, complete with buildings, vehicles, and what looked like civilian role players. The technology involved must have been incredibly sophisticated to create such a realistic environment indoors. Chen, "Your mission briefing is on that tablet," said one of the technicians, pointing to a device mounted near what appeared to be the entrance to the simulation area. "You have 5 minutes to review the situation and formulate your plan. Once you enter the scenario, everything you do will be evaluated." Sarah picked up the tablet and immediately understood why the previous recruits had looked so troubled when they emerged. The asset was a captured intelligence officer who possessed information critical to preventing a terrorist attack that would kill thousands of civilians. The location was a school building in a densely populated urban area. The captors were using civilian shields, including children, to prevent a military response. Every option was terrible. A direct assault would likely result in civilian casualties, including children. A siege approach might give the captors time to execute the asset or escape with valuable intelligence. A negotiation strategy might save civilian lives but could fail to secure the asset and the information needed to prevent a larger attack. Sarah closed her eyes and forced herself to think clearly. This scenario was designed to have no perfect solution. The evaluation wasn't about finding the right answer, because there wasn't one. It was about how she approached an impossible situation and what factors she prioritized when everything was at stake. When she opened her eyes, she had made her decision. The simulation began with Sarah positioned outside the school building with a small team of simulated special operations soldiers. The environment was incredibly realistic, complete with the sounds of a bustling city, concerned civilians gathering behind police barriers, and the tension that comes with an active crisis situation. "Ma'am, we have confirmed visual on the asset through a third-floor window," reported one of her simulated team members. "We also count at least 15 civilian shields, including 7 children." Sarah moved to a position where she could see the building herself. Through high-powered optics, she could make out figures moving inside the school. The situation was exactly as described in the briefing, but seeing it made the moral complexity even more stark. "What are our breaching options?" she asked. "We can go through the main entrance, but they'll see us coming and likely execute hostages. We can breach from multiple points simultaneously, but that increases the risk of civilian casualties. Or we can try a precision approach through the window where the asset is being held." Sarah considered each option while watching the building. She noticed something that hadn't been mentioned in the briefing. The school appeared to have been evacuated recently, suggesting that the civilian shields were brought in specifically for this purpose, not students who had been trapped by circumstances. "I need communication with the captors," she said finally. "Ma'am, negotiation hasn't been authorized. Command wants a tactical solution." Sarah felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. This was the moment Webb had been talking about. The line between following orders and making moral judgments about what was right. "Patch me through to the building," she said firmly. "I'm not going to assault a building full of civilians without at least trying to find a better way." The radio crackled to life, and a voice with a heavy accent came through clearly. "You want to talk? Talk quickly. My patience is limited." "I want to propose an exchange," Sarah said, keying her radio. "Release the children and I'll come in to replace them. You keep your adult shields in your position, but you let the kids go." The silence stretched long enough that she wondered if the communication had been cut. Finally, the voice returned. "Why would I accept this? You are just one person. Because I'm the mission commander. I'm worth more as a hostage than those children are as shields. It improves your negotiating position while showing good faith." "Ma'am, you can't do this," said her team leader. "Command will never approve." Sarah looked at the building again, thinking about the children inside who were being used as human shields in a conflict they couldn't possibly understand. Sometimes command doesn't have all the information they need to make the best decision. What happened next tested every aspect of her training and character. The negotiation continued for 20 more minutes, with Sarah ultimately agreeing to enter the building alone in exchange for the release of all civilian shields. It was a calculated risk that prioritized innocent lives while still maintaining the possibility of completing the mission. The simulation concluded with Sarah inside the building, having successfully secured the release of the civilians but now facing the challenge of extracting both herself and the asset without backup support. The scenario ended before resolution, leaving her unsure whether her approach had been successful or had simply delayed an inevitable tragedy. When she emerged from the simulation room, Colonel Webb was waiting personally to escort her to the debrief session. They walked in silence through corridors she hadn't seen before, past offices with closed doors and windows that seemed designed to prevent anyone from seeing inside. "Sit down, Chen," Webb said as they entered a small room with just 2 chairs and a table. For the first time since the program had begun, Sarah found herself alone with the most senior instructor. "That was an interesting approach you took in there," he said, settling into his chair and studying her with those unsettling eyes. "Tell me why you chose negotiation over tactical action." Sarah had been preparing for this question throughout the simulation. "Sir, the mission was to extract the asset while minimizing collateral damage. A direct assault would have guaranteed civilian casualties. Negotiation offered the possibility of achieving the objective while preserving innocent lives. Even though you violated direct orders to pursue a tactical solution, sir, I interpreted my mission parameters to include preserving civilian lives as a higher priority than following a specific tactical approach." Webb leaned back in his chair, and Sarah noticed that he had rolled up his sleeves, making the Black Viper tattoo clearly visible. She forced herself not to stare at it, but she couldn't ignore its presence. "You realize that your decision put yourself at extreme personal risk with no guarantee of success?" "Yes, sir." "And you would make the same decision again?" Sarah hesitated, not because she was uncertain, but because she sensed this was the crucial moment of the entire evaluation. Everything up to this point had been leading to this conversation, this question, this test of who she really was. When everything was stripped away, "Yes, sir, I would make the same decision again." Webb smiled for the first time since she had met him. It wasn't a warm smile, but it wasn't hostile either. It was the smile of someone who had found something he had been looking for. "Do you know what this mark means?" he asked, extending his arm so the tattoo was clearly visible. "I believe it indicates service in classified special operations units, sir. More specifically, it identifies members of units that operate in situations where normal military protocols don't apply, where decisions have to be made based on human judgment rather than predetermined procedures, where the stakes are so high that conventional approaches would fail." He stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the training facilities where other military personnel were going through their own evaluations and challenges. "What you demonstrated in that simulation wasn't just tactical thinking or leadership ability. You showed the kind of moral reasoning that we need in operators who work in the grey areas. Most people would have followed orders and assaulted the building. Some would have refused the mission entirely. You found a third option that preserved your values while still pursuing the objective." Sarah remained silent, sensing that Webb wasn't finished. The Black Viper mark represents more than just elite training. It represents a commitment to doing what's right, even when what's right contradicts what's expected. It's for people who understand that sometimes the most important battles are fought not against enemy soldiers, but against the temptation to sacrifice principles for the sake of expedience. He turned back to face her, and Sarah saw something in his expression that she hadn't seen before: respect. "Congratulations, Chen. You've not only completed the program, you've demonstrated the kind of character that makes someone worthy of carrying this mark." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The entire program hadn't just been about special operations training. It had been an extended evaluation process for recruitment into whatever unit Webb represented. The Black Viper mark wasn't just a tattoo. It was membership in something that operated beyond normal military structures. "Sir, I'm honored, but I need to understand what I'm being recruited for." Webb nodded approvingly. "Smart question. The unit I represent handles situations that fall between official military action and diplomatic solutions. We work in places that don't exist on maps, against enemies who won't be named in reports, for objectives that serve national interests but can never be publicly acknowledged. And the other recruits will return to their units with outstanding evaluations and recommendations for advanced training. They've all proven themselves to be exceptional soldiers. But only you demonstrated the specific combination of tactical skill, moral courage, and independent judgment that we need." Sarah thought about everything that had led to this moment. The months of training, the skepticism from peers and instructors, the constant pressure to prove herself in an environment designed to break people. All of it had been preparation for this conversation, this choice, this opportunity to serve at a level she had never imagined possible. "When do I start?" she asked. Webb's smile became genuine for the first time. "Tomorrow. But first you need to understand that once you accept this assignment, there's no going back to normal military service. Your career path becomes classified. Your missions become denimable. Your very existence becomes a state secret." "I understand, sir." "No, Chen, you don't. Not yet. But you will." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. The laughing stops now. From this point forward, you're not just representing yourself or even the military. You're representing something that exists in the shadows to protect people who will never know your name or thank you for your service. As they left the room together, Sarah realized that she had not just completed a training program, she had crossed a threshold into a world that existed parallel to everything she had known before. The black viper mark on Webb's arm wasn't just a symbol of elite training. It was a badge of membership in something that operated by different rules, with different missions, and with stakes that most people couldn't even imagine. The transformation was complete. Sarah Chen was no longer just an ambitious soldier trying to prove herself in a man's world. She had become something else entirely, a guardian, operating in the spaces between what was officially possible and what was absolutely necessary. And tomorrow she would begin to learn what that really meant.